The CPI report, Child Protection in Iowa, is brought to you by Vocal Victims of Child Abuse Laws. You can watch our program on Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock, and again it's repeated on Wednesday evening at 9:30, all on Mediacom Cable Channel 15. You can email us at vocaliowa at mchsi.com. We appreciate receiving telephone calls from parents who need help in situations with DHS. My telephone number is 515 276 3956. And you can reach John at 515 282 2672. My name is Don Burgmaier, and with me at the controls is my co-host,
John Harvey, and welcome to the CPI report. That's Child Protection in Iowa. We attempt to influence issues that have to do with child protection in Iowa, and sometimes our influence is heard, and sometimes it isn't. And the second big effort we make is to assist people who are having difficulties with the Department of Human Services. They have some bad habits like stealing children. And sometimes it's necessary that children be taken from their homes. Sometimes those efforts follow a different agenda than protection, and that's when we like to speak up and say this far and no farther. Of course, we're talking about a very, very powerful department. The Department of Human Services at one time had a budget, both federal and state funding, of $2.3 billion. That's quite a bit of money for a state the size of the state of Iowa. So we're not really pleased about fighting such a giant when indeed the major effort that we should be concentrating on is upholding the family, supporting the family. Not every family is a great family. Not every family is what we might call a functional family. Not every family is self-supporting. Not every family is the ideal family that we used to watch back in television days, early television days. Not just that mom and pop and puff and spot and so forth, a great family. In fact, I heard a statistic this past week that is somewhat startling. Not only are families broken apart, but sometimes they are formed without the commitment of marriage. And 1 out of 3 children fall into those kinds of family situations. Not a really happy situation. That doesn't mean that father doesn't love children. In fact, I've seen a tremendous amount of love and affection by fathers who are not committed to the mothers to the extent of actually getting married to the mothers. But I cannot help but think that it is not a good thing for children to try to make a go of life without a committed father, without a committed mother. I have a few other considerations, a few other criticisms too of the so-called nuclear family. And first of all, father needs to be the breadwinner. Now, it wouldn't bother me if mother was the breadwinner and father got to stay home with the little darlings. That sometimes happens in a situation. But when both are so committed to work that children are left at home and are left with alternative parents, that also invites trouble. And we have had all kinds of trouble springing up. In our state legislature, they had to pour all kinds of funds into um, daycare for parents who are working. Now, why do they have to work? I suppose they have to work and make enough taxes in order to pay the daycare, pay the taxes so the government can put the kids into daycare. Where are the children best off? The children would be best off home with mom, so that she can guard the television viewing, she can guard over the activities of the children in the neighborhood, she can guard over their computer access, and a few little things like that. Don, you had a comment at that point, right?
I was curious on what you what the meaning is of nuclear family.
Okay, that's mom and dad. What was it? Dick and Jane, and Sally, Puff and Spot. Where we have mom and committed to dad, dad committed to mom. By the way, I ran across a family in which they were considered, mom and dad were considered to be dysfunctional by DHS personnel because they depended on each other. And I said to this lady, I said, that's not dependency, that's called marriage. To depend on each other, being called dysfunctional. And this couple was, they insisted, well, mom, they got a hold of dad, so they were able to get him criminally charged. But they sent mom to 18 classes so that she could break that cycle of dependency upon father. So something that we consider to be part of the nuclear family, the mom and dad, Dick, Jane, Sally, and Spot and Buff, the kinds of family that older folks grew up with, but seem to be fleeting here. Don?
You were referring to family services when you talked about that woman jumping through the hoops, as we say, 18 classes she went to. In my opinion, if it's wrong, parents, don't do it. Just because there's this carrot out there in front of you that looks like your children, don't jump through the hoops if it's going to end up destroying you and the children in the end anyway. Don't do what DHS says.
Okay.
I had a question. What is it that
Super loud.
they're defining
Super loud.
determination? So I'm trying to figure out what is the defining determination of what makes it a dependency relationship. What are they getting at when they say that?
Well, mother seemed to depend on father for transportation and for being the breadwinner and so forth. For mom to be home, making cookies and baking the bread and fixing the dinner, that's not kosher anymore with the department personnel because they want mom out there in the workforce. They want mom.
They're trying to inject their values basically on the family, basically.
Correct.
That's what you're saying.
You have to get closer to that mic or speak up or
I'm
something.
sorry.
Okay.
I'm gonna be yelling
Your
here.
your words of wisdom.
Okay. No, but I was saying that they must be. It looks to me like I've seen an illegal opinion here not too long ago, about a year or so ago, that they're basically injecting these so-called modern middle-class values upon people at the children's and the family's expense.
That's correct. And in the Ninth Circuit, there was a case called Calabretta versus Floyd, and they made it very clear that it is not up to the social worker to replace her parental judgment, to replace the parent's parental judgment with that of her own. There's a place where government may be needed in a tiny proportion of the cases that we have in Iowa. But when you start making that into a system, that is really a shame. There are some real problems that we have in our judicial system. We have values of people, uh, people who value life so badly that they are willing to destroy it or willing to frustrate it. And there are some real problems here in a particular case called, the lady's last name is Plum, but she engaged in what I would say would be the rawest form of abuse of children because she said she was afraid. Don, would you tell us that story?
This comes from the Des Moines Register. It states, now 21, mom of baby Chelsea has good reports, gets parole. This is dated May 25th. The case in which a newborn died led to Iowa's safe haven law. Nicole Plum, the Chelsea teenager whose baby's death prompted Iowa's safe haven law for abandoned infants, has been granted a parole over 3 years in prison. Plum was 17 when she gave birth to the infant girl, who was later found dead in snow near the city's water tower. Plum was sentenced by a Tama County judge to 10 years in prison for felony child endangerment and involuntary manslaughter. Now 21, Plum was approved for parole Friday, said Elizabeth Robinson, chairwoman of the Iowa Parole Board. She already has been furlonged to an undisclosed home in Tama County where she will live. Plum entered prison in February 2002 and was transferred in January to a work release program in Marshalltown. She has done a really good job and has gotten good reports from the Department of Corrections, said Robertson. Plum probably will remain on parole until July 2006, she added. I wonder why they don't know exactly how long parole lasts. But it goes on, it says, the death of Plum's child, who became known as Baby Chelsea, prompted the legislature to approve a safe haven law that grants immunity from prosecution to parents who leave unwanted babies in the care of health facilities. 6 infants have been surrendered to Iowa hospitals under the law, and all have been adopted by new families, said Roger Munns of the Iowa Department of Human Services. The discovery of the body in February 2001 stunned Chelsea, a town of 287 people. Plum, who was arrested 2 weeks later, was remorseful in court, tearfully recounting the night she gave birth alone. She said she denied the pregnancy and she denied the birth. People in Chelsea no longer dwell on the baby's death, but it's hard to predict how they will react if Plum returns to the community, said Jackie Dorak, co-owner of the Chelsea convenience store. There will probably be some people who won't like it, but there will be others who will support her, Dorbeck said.
I already had her up on the screen
Okay.
while you were talking.
I'll turn it over to you, John.
Okay. One of the things that seems strange to me here is that this young lady, who should have known something about the respect for life, even at age 17, decided to destroy it because she said she was afraid. Well, maybe she'd been engaging in activities that she knew that her parents and others would not approve of, but certainly engaging in activities which brings about the death of a child, it would seem that the consequences from that should be much, much greater than any consequences she could foresee coming from friends, neighbors, and family. It does seem strange to me that we choose to put someone in prison for a year or 2 or 3 or 4 for killing a child, but yet, and this is not to approve of the sexual abuse, but for someone who has molested a child can go to prison for years and years and years. I know one fellow who has served 12 years so far and may be serving more because of false allegations of molestation. Now, certainly it is not a caring person who would molest. It is not a caring person who would kill a child. However, it would seem like to me that the person whose victim is still living certainly shouldn't suffer the kind of punishment that they're looking at now. Now the state legislature is doubling the penalty for these non-death violations, violent criminal behavior, which seems somewhat inordinate in my opinion. And Terrance, you thought that you had something to bring to the floor regarding that matter.
Yeah, I did. I agree with you. I think your sentiments ring true. I think that this crazy policy, for on one hand, and like I said, I do not approve of that behavior either, someone sexually molesting a child, but it is far worse in gravity to have a child killed. And yet, and still we have a policy whereby killing the child, we let the lady out after just 3 or 4 years, and she's good to go.
Right.
It's one of those aberrant policies that doesn't make sense. And then there's a recent case of a fellow by the name of Huss that's been in the news here lately, and he has basically been put to task. This guy did a heinous crime about 18 years ago, killed his wife. Supposedly he was psychotic at the time, or delusional. I recall hearing some tapes of the fellow while he was being found in the home where he killed his wife, and there was blood all over, and he was quoting biblical verses, and he was acting in a very bizarre manner when the police got there. Well, he served about 18 years on that, and the state apparently tried to get him and committed for life because they felt it was something sexual that he was doing because she was partially naked. You know, it doesn't make any sense, but you know, this is what they try to do. If the crime doesn't fit, you shouldn't try to change the meaning of the words to make it so it's something else. But anyway, they tried to get him committed for life because they felt it was sexual. Now, it's all fair that, you know, he served all that time, but at the same point, you're going to commit the guy for life because you say that it might have been sexual. You know, it doesn't make sense. Again, it's the same story with the policy. It doesn't make sense. Why are you going to give a guy something, or you're trying to sentence him or commit him for life for something that's not sexual?
Okay. I saw, sometimes I go back over some of the clippings. All too often, however, I lose the first page. But I've got enough of this one, at least to comment on it, because we talk about child sex abuse declines in Iowa. That's the headlines of this article. And this goes back 2 or 3 years now, when it was noticed that there was an enormous decline in child sexual abuse. However, the department doesn't want to admit that there's been a decline in abuse. The department wants to keep fanning this very hot-button term. One would think that because of all of the money that has been poured into Iowa City, into Cedar Rapids, that would be the safest place in all of Iowa for a child to live. Turns out that Josetta Gage came from Cedar Rapids, where there is a protective center. By the way, the protective centers were funded very heavily this past time around. Protective centers are where they can rush a child. In fact, a policeman can pick up a child off the street, apparently, nowadays. At least we saw one case of that, where a policeman just can pick up a child, take him to a protective center, uh, make certain that they have a sexual abuse examination, and then the policeman can charge the person that is named as the perpetrator uh, uh, of that crime. The centers don't handle a whole lot of cases, but they do have a pretty decent protocol as to how to handle it, and it goes up into the hundreds of dollars for um, a single examination. It's a very invasive examination, and in most cases, it's not necessary. Uh, but from the part of this article, everybody jumped. It's interesting to see that everybody jumped in to say, well, the reason why sexual abuse has declined is because we made it decline. We had a big part in the decline. We'll take credit for that. Thank you. If that were the case, if it's declining, why would we have a child in the most, the safest town in Iowa, Cedar Rapids, with St. Luke's Hospital and their protective centers? Not only that, but there have been nonprofit corporations come into Cedar Rapids and have all kinds of experimental programs going on in this area that family-centered services and so forth. Well, that is totally ridiculous that we should have such a thing as that going on. And yet we have child sexual abuse like you've never seen it anywhere else in Iowa, where a child is kidnapped, sexually abused, and then killed. Well, I think that's a sad situation. Well, let's go back to the article. There's the suggestion that organizations are doing a better job of catching people who offend, Scott said. Well, Scott is the head of one of the big organizations that draws over $1 million from the state treasury for holding these kinds of programs. Many of the abusers are repeaters. He said that the sex abuse decline could be linked to programs that reach 30,000 Iowa children and warn them of the dangers. Well, you see, if you're going to protect children, children are not the best agents for protection. Who are the best agents for protection of each child in Iowa? As parents. They're beginning slowly to understand that this protection thing, even though they're spending over $1 million to do it, this protection thing needs to have the assistance of parents rather than going into the schools, into their crowded schedule, and presenting programs, Happy Bear programs, and all kinds of silly programs, good touch, bad touch type of programs. The message is basically stop and go and tell. They are told there's good touch and bad touch. And if there's bad touch, you tell somebody. Targeting younger children with prevention programs hits the group most likely to be preyed upon, Scott said, as Steve Scott. It astounds me, but more than half of the sex abuse victims are under the age of 6, he said. So how are they going to catch all those children under the age of 6 unless they are already in school? Oh, they're actually going into the preschools with these silly programs. He also credited stricter sentencing and better treatment programs. The treatment programs are almost missing. putting sexual offenders away for longer times has kept the offenders away from children. Susan Tesdall, if that's the case, then why do we need the 1,000-foot rule, Terrance? Susan Tesdall, director of the Child Protection Center at St. Luke's Hospital. See, that's the reason why I said because of St. Luke's. Cedar Rapids ought to be the safest place in all of Iowa. Susan Tesdall, director of Child Protection Center at St. Luke's Hospital in Cedar Rapids, and the public said the public identification of sexual predators by law enforcement has raised awareness. That's a big term. We need $1 million worth of awareness, don't we?
Wow.
People have more information before them now and more understanding about what should be done, she said. Armstrong, by the way, he's the chief at Department of Human Services, said no studies had been conducted on whether the state's sex offender registry and a program in which pictures of offenders are released to newspapers have had an impact. See, they put out these big programs, and by the way, they're going to list all the names in every county and then send the bill to the state treasurer for putting names in every county newspaper or in a newspaper in every county every year. Certainly it has increased public awareness and has helped parents to be more cautious, he said. Well, less of a drop. Overall abuse, continued cases of types of physical abuse of children are also declined, but at a slower rate. Sexual abuse alone, 13% from 2,823 cases to 2,444 cases. That trend might be reversing in the past 2 years. Physical abuse cases, many involving neglect, have jumped almost 30%. Why did we say that they jumped 30%? It's because they have no definitions. Anything can be determined to be neglect if it differs from the opinion of the social worker. According to Vern Armstrong, head of the Department of Human Services Bureau of Protective Services. Now, doesn't it seem strange that they account or they say that because of the fact that we have tougher law enforcement, the child abuse has dropped. Now, what has happened? Well, we had a blip somehow, just set a gauge blip on the radar screen, and that all of a sudden shakes everything up. What we're saying now is that there's no such thing as a real improvement. What we need to do is double the penalties. See, the penalties were working before when the child abuse cases declined. Now we need to double the penalties. By the way, when the General Assembly parted this time, there were a number of real financial problems that they were trying to face. And one of those financial problems was a problem that had to do with funding the whole situation. Well, funding was one of the big problems with funding is the number of changes they were making to the criminal law to make things to put DNA, to put these criminals, stamp them up with the DNA identification. That's expensive. To put ankle bracelets on those who are being released, that's expensive. In fact, it ran, according to the fiscal note, as high as $10 million. Well, they agreed by the time they needed to go home from the assembly that that really was only going to cost us $4 million a year to run the extensive programs that we had here.
Now, how would they make that error? That's a $6 million error.
Yeah, it's a $6 million error. You'll have to
How would they
contact
figure
them.
that it would be 4 million.
You bet.
First they figured it was 10 million. That
You
doesn't make
bet.
any sense.
Right. Okay. I'm going to take a quick break here, and then.
I did have a comment on something
Okay.
else that you did say.
I'll just turn it over to you entirely here, and we'll take off here. I don't know where your partner went. He sort of disappeared.
Okay.
Okay,
Well, I
Don.
guess this will be the John and Terrance show for a few minutes here.
Don, where are you?
But yeah, one of the things I
Okay,
wanted to
Terrance.
comment on, John, was that the weird thing that one of the troublesome aspects, I think, of that registry is it doesn't account for errors. One case in particular, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he was a guy out of somewhere in the East Coast. I seen it on the Larry King show last week. There was a guy who had a child. It was an older child. He's probably about in his late 20s, and what he had done, he was mildly retarded. And what the kid had done when he was younger was he had basically exposed himself to another child, to a younger child. I think he was about 15 or 16 at the time, and the little girl must have been about 6 or 7. But we were talking about a mildly retarded kid at the time, and he probably was about the same level, mentally speaking, as the 7-year-old girl. But what they had done, he had basically exposed himself and did something like I'll show you, you show me kind of deal. But anyway, he had gotten on this registry that way, and then what happened after that, there was a number of years that had passed, and he had, of course, he was still living with his parents because he was mildly retarded. And I do believe he also had some sort of difficulty walking and things of that nature. He not only had mental retardation, but he was also had some physical challenges as well. I believe he had some sort of multiple syndromes. But anyway, to make a long story short, this retarded fella got on the registry, and he probably shouldn't have been on the registry. Well, he shouldn't have been on the registry for accidentally exposing himself to this 7-year-old child. Somebody had found out that he was on the registry and was in their neighborhood, and they put a big sign near his residence, and he had seen the sign. It said something about sex abuser lives over here, and this was outside his residence. Well, this mildly retarded fella that was, up in his 20s by now, with the mind of probably about a 10-year-old at the time, he got so distraught about it, he killed himself. So, we need to really think through these policies before we do something that, in his situation, really didn't make a whole lot of sense. And, you've got prosecutors that probably shouldn't have prosecuted this guy as an adult, or probably shouldn't have prosecuted him anyway, as an adult or not as a kid either, being that he had some mental, he suffers from mental retardation. And one other thing here, I got a comment here from a fellow, is a member of the A Matter of Justice.org. That's www.amatterofjustice.org. And I think this is an apt quote. John Mosley is his name. He's an attorney out of the East Coast. He's talking about the judiciary, and for those who haven't watched the show, that is my gig. I am the chief judge of the judges here for the state of Iowa here. So it's an unofficial role, but it is a role that does need to be filled because the judiciary is not doing their job, and I had an organization called Vote Iowa Judges Out. But anyway, Jonathan Mosley states about our judiciary that those at the top do not take any such of responsibility, that they are the leaders of the justice system here in the nation. They do not see their role as leadership or protecting the rights of people. The justices at the top, in states as well as federal, seem to see their job as thinking deep thoughts, isolated from the people and doing as little work as possible. finding dozens of escape mechanisms for dodging and evading difficult decisions by not taking appeals are clearly bad court decisions. You and he also states that those at the top are mostly simply content to simply be at the top and take hold. They're afraid to take hold of the steering wheel. And in their minds, they see themselves as being great thinkers, but it comes through as not wanting to get their hands dirty with the cares of the real world around them. And this is what happens here in America. And it's so sad to say, here in Iowa, with our chief judge, Judge Lavarado, and I call him that. It's spelled Lavaroto, but you can also pronounce it Judge Lavarado, because what we have here in Iowa is a system of justice that's based upon lies, and that's why we have Chief Judge Lavarado. I want to quote a quote from one of the more honorable judges here that we have in the state, Judge Sackett. This was a case a few weeks back, April 28th of 2005. Isidro Ramirez versus State of Iowa. It was a post-conviction relief. This is the guy's last appeal. And a criminal conviction for murder. Well, it's a heinous crime, but I'll just read to you the insanity of what's going on here in the judiciary. Judge Sackett, who was the lone voice trying to spell out a just and fair decision in this case, stated, well, I recognize the district court did not dictate a ruling in the record, but I do believe that this should not relieve the district court of preparing its own ruling. And what's even more troublesome is that the ruling prepared by the prosecutor contained factual and legal errors. Well, in this case, they basically allowed those factual and legal errors that the judge in the lower court had signed off on to go uncorrected. And I believe that this has happened in more cases than we actually know. I believe, John, you had a case in which the judge signed off on a couple of orders that contained factual and legal errors.
Correct.
Now, legal errors we are supposed to expect from time to time. However, if a prosecutor or one of the party's attorneys prepares something for the judge and the judge rubber stamps it, we cannot condone such a practice if indeed we are going to have what's supposed to be called a justice system. And we should spell justice Justice instead of Justus. But that's indeed what we're doing here in America with this kind of thing going on. But, you know, it's not, I guess we can't really blame the judges. I don't know. We've had these kind of things happen from the inception of this country. You know, we've got these pseudo laws, I should call them, pseudo constitution. We've got a constitution that dictates very grand things and grandiose rights, free speech, this, that. It's great in theory, but the application is not there. We were supposed to be given life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, some of the people that coined that phrase were slaveholders. And to this day, we've got guys in office in these positions of the judiciary who say one thing and do another. And I would say that perhaps that is just, they inherited that trait, and so there we stand. But, you know, we've got to correct the problem at some point. Wouldn't you say, John?
That's right.
When we've got a guy by the name of Huss who, you know, done a very heinous thing 18 years ago in killing his wife, and this case has been in the news a lot lately. And then you have prosecutors go after the guy for being a sexual predator and try to commit him to a mental institution for the rest of his life, when in fact he did not do anything sexual. We have a situation where the justice system is basically operating from their hidden agenda again and not operating from within anything that's within the scope of a definition of a statute. Uh, Again, as I say, they want to they say another thing in the law, but they want to do something else as when it comes to the true application. Um, and that's why I say, and I've said this before, when we break the law, it's called a crime. When they break the law, it's called an interpretation.
Okay.
And there's a fine line between that. Did you have any comments on that, John?
uh, I'm not very impressed when I see the participation of the prosecutor uh, in the judicial process. Um, I can understand that once a hearing is over with and a determination has been made by the judge, that it might be useful to ask each of the counsels to provide a written order consistent with the ruling. But when you find that the prosecutors are actually feeding information ex parte to the judge, then I'd say we've got a prosecutor who is out of bounds. Justin Allen is an example. And a colleague here, Don, was telling me some other information in a case that he was following. And I said, don't you realize that that was the Attorney General's sidekick that was writing the order? Because there's nothing in the record that would support any part of the order. So when you have things like that, when you have prosecutors acting like assistant judges, we have a very dangerous situation. And both of them are being paid by taxpayer funds. Both of them are supposed to be under ethics boards. Both of them are supposed to be professional individuals. And yet they are working together as though they were working in the same law firm or working on the same side of the street.
Yeah.
All against the poor person who doesn't have the funding to buy or to rent an attorney.
Oh, you can rent them now?
Yeah.
I think I need to be on that plan.
That's right. You bet. So,
No, but they do have the prepaid legal services and some of those groups that offer benefits such as that. I don't know how good they are. I've heard good and bad things, but to each his own. But as you were saying, they have these ethical boards. One of the big brouhahas the past year was the prosecutorial's lack of any real correction of their associates within that area. The prosecutors were basically given the rubber stamp, much as are the judges as far as the complaints are concerned. People who complained to a judge or a prosecutor were basically seen as a colleague, and the Good Old Boy Network played a role in dismissing tons of complaints against prosecutors, and I would say that that appears to be the case with the judiciary as well here in Iowa. Well, they reformed because of the big stink in the Des Moines Register this fall. They supposedly reformed, I should say, the prosecutorial complaint procedure, where they're headed by the same board as the regular lawyers who regularly get reprimanded and suspended, and even, heck, they've even had their license revoked and kicked out of the state for the most part.
they don't like that, do they?
No, they do not like that. But, the prosecutors and the judges have been, the judges are still, for the most part, immune from that same kind of treatment. The prosecutors have become under the wing of the same board, though, that governs the lawyers, and they didn't like that either. But that's supposed to be coming into effect here in July. But the troubling aspect I see of the whole situation is that they still capitulated to the desire of the prosecutors to have local prosecutors handle some of the investigations concerning them. Well, you might as well have removed the initial barrier or the initial procedure in the first place to having the same board govern the lawyers if you're going to kick it back to the same people that have done so bad in the past. So, now we've got a situation here that it seems like what it says is good, but when they do it, it's not so good. Then we've still got the judiciary here. I wonder when the judiciary is going to come to account for its crimes. And I do say crimes because it is a crime. You can call it an interpretation, but I disagree. If the interpretation, if I break the law or if someone else breaks the law, it's a crime, then obviously I'm going to call a spade and say what you're doing is a crime, Judge Liberato or Lialato. We have to come to a point where the judiciary here in Iowa has to account for what it is doing to the citizenry, that being you, me, whomever. We've got people that are regularly denied their rights in court, and more particularly, people are having their issues skipped over by judges. Not only that, but we've got judges who are willing to sign off on a party's written ruling drawn up by an attorney with factual and legal errors in it. And that, to me, is a crime. But when you have nobody to make the judiciary account, including the Judicial Qualifications Commission, which is basically a agency or a wing of the judiciary that doesn't do hardly anything. When you look at the results over the past 30 years, they've only removed less than a handful of judges, I should say. I can't say that they're doing their job. And when at the same time, in the same profession, in the legal profession, the lawyers here, is plentiful. When you look at how many lawyers are removed and suspended, there's at least about half a dozen every month. So why is a judge who's in the same profession as the lawyers not held to account for the same things that the lawyers are? And they operate in total secrecy. We do not know what the judicial qualification does. We don't know when they meet. We know that they're supposed to meet a certain time of year, a number of times a year, to review complaints. But yet and still, for most of us, all they send out is a form letter saying that, well, this is what we're supposed to do. We're empowered to do this, and we find no merit in your complaint. So there we go. But that's why we're here. Vote Iowa judges out, because each and every one of us here in Iowa have the ability to vote the judges out. We're one of the few states that has that ability, and I say that Judge Liberato and a lot of his cronies, maybe some of the judges in our county or your county, need to get a wake-up call. We need to just send a message and vote several of them out and have them deal with joblessness for a change. Or maybe their good old pal, the other judge, would give them some work like they did the drunk judge over in the other county.
Right.
They kicked off the bench for being caught. The second OWI, they somehow secured a state contract to do some more lawyering, even though he's still getting paid for being removed off the bench for supposedly being what do they call
Disabled?
that? Disabled
Uh-huh.
for mental or health reasons or something of that nature.
Mhm.
It's amazing, but
Isn't
it happens, and that's an example of where an interpretation, where they call it interpretation, we call it a crime when it's against, or they call it a crime when it's something we do.
Okay.
But,
One of the
Thanks a lot.
things that we've said on this program is that the last resort in protecting children should be removing them from their parents or placing any kind of separation between a child and his parents. I've seen them actually put on restrictive orders to keep them away from the children, even though they have not commenced an investigation, because the assumption is that the parent is guilty until proven innocent. Taking the children away from the home can be extremely traumatic, and I do not know how they can pull that off. Pull them away from their home and then keep them as stable children, because I don't think they remain stable children all along. Well, I've got a story that tells a little bit about what happens when a child is taken from the home. This couple decided that they were going to do something about it. An area couple sues DHS over the daughter's death. This is out of the Quad Cities. The reporter is Todd Ruger. A Scott County couple has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Iowa Department of Human Services, claiming the agency failed to provide proper medical care to their infant daughter after she was taken from their custody. The lawsuit filed Thursday by Amanda and Davy Moreland in connection with the 2003 death of Christiana Moreland also claims that the agency has engaged in deliberate conduct designed to cover up negligence that caused the child's death. The parents claim in the lawsuit that Christiana was removed from their home unnecessarily and improperly, and then placed in foster care with a stranger in whose home she was found late November 29th with a blanket either covering her head or wrapped around her neck. The girl was pronounced dead upon arrival at a hospital. The lawsuit further claims that Christiana missed the doctor's appointments after being taken from her parents' house and was not properly treated for various medical conditions prior to her death. You see, these stories don't get all across the state when they're filed like this. This way they're heard in, because of our program, it's obvious that they know about it in Scott County. It's obvious they know about it now in Polk County. And now it's obvious that they know about this case in Pottawatomie County because of the transfer of the tapes to Pottawatomie. The lawsuit further claims that Christiana missed the doctor's appointments. The Morelands also claim that they and their attorneys were not permitted to participate in any decision-making regarding the autopsy or to have a doctor or other representative in attendance. Plaintiffs believe that the defendants have engaged in deliberate conduct designed to cover up their negligence and other conduct which caused the wrongful death of Christiana. The lawsuit states, a death certificate on file at the Scott County Recorder's Office attributes the November 30th, 2003 death of the child, who was almost 3 months old, to sudden infant death syndrome. Sudden infant death syndrome is not a clinical determination. Sudden infant death syndrome is what they tell us occurs when they can't name anything else. Roger Munns, a spokesman for the Department of Human Services for DHS, responded to the lawsuit by saying that the death of the child is a great tragedy for all concerned. It's all the sadder when the child faced trying conditions in life, conditions that brought the family to the attention of the child welfare officials and the judicial system, he said. It's sadder when people spend energy attempting to affix blame when Quad City attorneys for the Morelands, Jeffrey Bittner and Patricia Zamora, did not return telephone messages left Thursday by the Quad City Times. See, so apparently they don't want to communicate and to give any kind of a satisfactory answer to these people who are pleading for answers. The lawsuit also names as defendants 6 individuals who are employees or agents of the DHS who the Morelands say were acting within the scope of their employment or agents with DHS. See, they have a lot of agencies around Iowa that provide services on behalf of the Department of Human Services under contract. Christiana was removed from her parents' home after a complaint of domestic abuse between the Moreland couple, the lawsuit states. The complaint came from a person who, the lawsuit continues, had a history of mental illness. The DHS investigators knew of the complainant's mental illness history, the lawsuit states. The lawsuit further alleges that no grief counseling was offered to Christiana's parents, but that it was offered to the foster parents who, the parent who was caring for the girl when she died. Well, this is a situation in which they've removed, and we don't know all the ins and outs of this story, but it's a sad situation when they move children from one parent to another, or from one situation to another, and have little regard about the children themselves. Well, it's sad and quite disconcerting to do the kinds of things that that they are seemingly up to with respect to caring for the protection of these children. And I think one thing that I need to point out as we close our program today is that there are some things that you need to know with respect to reports that they write up on your family, ways of resisting those reports. Here is a starter. This is the individual and the contact information for those of you who would like to get an evidentiary hearing looking into any report that is written up on you. The person that you would contact is Rhoda Harris, 5th floor of the Hoover Building, Des Moines, Iowa, 50319. And there's a couple of telephone messages or telephone numbers for both voice and fax. There's a long list there of information that you can dial into the DHS, but the simplest one is that one at the bottom called /snipurl.com/9FAR, and that brings up a form that gives you an opportunity to look into look into getting an evidentiary hearing. Well, if you have need to know a little more information about that, these are a couple of phone calls or phone numbers that you need to contact if you need assistance with problems with DHS. We'll see you next week.